America's security and leadership don't just depend on our military strength or our alliances or our diplomacy. First and foremost, America's strength depends on a strong economy, where our middle class is growing and everyone who works hard has a chance to get ahead. So let me say a few words about the situation that's developed over the past few weeks on Capitol Hill. Here at home, the United States Congress has two pressing responsibilities: pass a budget on time and pay our bills on time. If Congress chooses not to pass a budget by Monday, the end of the fiscal year, they will shut down the government along with many vital services that the American people depend on. The good news is, within the past couple of hours, the United States Senate, Democrats and Republicans, acted responsibly by voting to keep our government open and delivering the services the American people expect. Now it's up to the Republicans in the House of Representatives to do the same. I say that because obviously Democrats have a great interest in making sure that these vital services continue to help the American people. And so far, the Republicans in the House of Representatives have refused to move forward. And here's the thing. Unlike the last time they threatened this course of action, this debate isn't really about deficits. In fact, our deficits are falling at the fastest pace that they have in 60 years. By the end of this year, we will have cut our deficits by more than half since I took office. So that's not what this is about. And in fact, if you've been following the discussion, the Republicans in the House don't even make a pretense that that's what this is about. Instead, the House Republicans are so concerned with appeasing the Tea Party that they've threatened a government shutdown or worse unless I gut or repeal the Affordable Care Act. I said this yesterday, let me repeat it. That's not going to happen. More than 100 million Americans currently already have new benefits and protections under the law. On Tuesday, about 40 million more Americans will be able to finally buy quality, affordable health care, just like anybody else. Those marketplaces will be open for business on Tuesday, no matter what, even if there's a government shutdown. That's a done deal. As I've said before, if Republicans have specific ideas on how to genuinely improve the law, rather than gut it, rather than delay it, rather than repeal it, I'm happy to work with them on that through the normal democratic processes. But that will not happen under the threat of a shutdown. So over the next 3 days, House Republicans will have to decide whether to join the Senate and keep the government open or shut it down because they can't get their way on an issue that has nothing to do with the deficit. I realize that a lot of what's taking place right now is political grandstanding, but this grandstanding has real effects on real people. If the government shuts down on Tuesday, military personnel, including those risking their lives overseas for us right now, will not get paid on time. Federal loans for rural communities, small business owners, families buying a home will be frozen. I'm already starting to get letters from people worried that this will have an impact on them directly. Critical research into life-saving discoveries will be immediately halted. The federal government has a large role across the country and touches the lives of millions of people, and those people will be harmed. And even the threat of a shutdown already is probably having a dampening effect on our economy. We saw that the last time these kinds of shenanigans were happening up on Capitol Hill. So to any Republicans on our economy, we saw that the last time these kinds of shenanigans were happening up on Capitol Hill. So to any Republican in Congress who's currently watching, I'd encourage you to think about who you're hurting. There are probably young people in your office right now who came to work for you without much pay because they believed that public service was noble. You're preparing to send them home without a paycheck. You've got families with kids back in your districts who serve their country in the federal government. And now they might have to plan how they're going to get by if you shut the government down. Past shutdowns have disrupted the economy, and this shutdown would as well. It would throw a wrench into the gears of our economy at a time when those gears have gained some traction. And that's why many Republican senators and many Republican governors have urged Republicans to knock it off, pass a budget, and move on. Let's get this done. This brings me to Congress's second responsibility. Once they vote to keep the government open, they also have to vote within the next couple of weeks to allow the Treasury to pay the bills for the money that Congress has already spent. I want to repeat, raising the debt ceiling is simply authorizing the Treasury to pay for what Congress has already authorized. Failure to meet this responsibility would be far more dangerous than a government shutdown. It would effectively be an economic shutdown with impacts not just here, but around the world. We don't fully understand what might happen, the dangers involved, because no Congress has ever actually threatened default. But we know it would have a profound destabilizing effect on the entire economy, on the world economy, because America is the bedrock of world investment. The dollar is the reserve currency. The debt that is issued by the Treasury is the foundation for our capital markets. That's why you don't fool with it. Now, some Republicans have suggested that unless I agree to an even longer list of demands, not just gutting the health care law, but cutting taxes for millionaires or rolling back rules on big banks and polluters or other pet projects that they'd like to see, and they've been trying to get passed over the last couple of years, that they would push the button, throw America into default for the first time in history, and risk throwing us back into a recession. Now, I am willing to work with anybody who wants to have a serious conversation about our fiscal future. I've demonstrated that by putting forward serious reforms to tax and entitlement programs that would bring down our long-term deficits. I have said in the past, and I will continue to say, that I'm willing to make a whole bunch of tough decisions, ones that may not be entirely welcomed by my own party. But we're not going to do this under the threat of blowing up the entire economy. I will not negotiate over Congress's responsibility to pay the bills that have already been racked up. Voting for the Treasury to pay America's bills is not a concession to me. That's not doing me a favor. That's simply carrying out the solemn responsibilities that come with holding office up there. I don't know how I can be more clear about this. Nobody gets to threaten the full faith and credit of the United States just to extract political concessions. No one gets to hurt our economy and millions of innocent people just because there are a couple of laws that you do not like. It has not been done in the past. We're not going to start doing it now. I'm not going to start setting a precedent, not just for me, but for future presidents, where one chamber in Congress can basically say each time there needs to be a vote to make sure Treasury pays its bills, we're not going to sign it unless our particular hobby horse gets advanced. Imagine if you had a Republican president and a Democratic speaker, and the Democratic speaker said, well, gets advanced. Imagine if you had a Republican president and a Democratic speaker, and the Democratic speaker said, well, we're not going to pass the debt ceiling unless we raise corporate taxes by 40%, or unless we pass background checks on guns, or whatever other list of agenda items Democrats were interested in. Does anybody actually think that we would be hearing from Republicans that that was acceptable behavior? That's not how our constitutional system is designed. We are not going to do it. The American people have worked too hard to recover from a bunch of crises, several of them now over the last couple of years inflicted by some of the same folks in Congress that we're talking about now, to see extremists in Congress cause another crisis. And keep in mind, by the way, this whole thing has to do with keeping the government open for a few months. The continuing resolution, the bill that's designed to avert a government shutdown, basically just funds the government for another couple months, so we could be doing this all over again. I'm sure the American people are thrilled about that. And that's why we've got to break this cycle. My message to Congress is this: do not shut down the government, do not shut down the economy, pass a budget on time, pay our bills on time. Refocus on the everyday concerns of the American people. There will be differences between Democrats and Republicans. We can have all kinds of conversations about how to resolve those differences. There'll be areas where we can work together. There'll be areas where we disagree. But do not threaten to burn the house down simply because you haven't gotten 100% of your way. That's not how our democracy is supposed to work. Every day that this goes on is another day that we're not focused on doing what we need to be focused on, which is rebuilding this great country of ours so that our middle class is growing and everybody's got opportunity if they're willing to work hard. That's what I'm focused on. That's what Congress should be focused on as well. Thank you very much, everybody.
This Week in Economics on the 29th of September 2013, our last program in September. As the political equivalent, or the economic equivalent actually, of a political October surprise is set to be no surprise at all. You just heard from President Obama. He made his position very clear on the current resolution of his CR, that he will demand a clean CR. There will not be any delay in the Affordable Care Act known as Obamacare, nor will there be other extraneous amendments attached to it. The House has had a meeting with their political committee under the leader Boehner, and he has said that they will go along with their plan to attach various amendments to delay in Obamacare. Thus, the country is headed for a government shutdown, the first time in 17 years. We'll get into the effects of the shutdown on the economy, some projections there from the people at Moody's and others. We'll get to that in just a second. And also we'll look at the deficit and where it is going. We have from Dr. Ellendorf a brief testimony that he gave on it and the projections there. Now, this is an interesting situation. An old American term, it's a double barrel deal, in that we have the CR, or continuing resolution. Now, all that basically does is take care of funding of the government, period. Now, the other part of it is the deficit limit. The Congress must okay the extension of the deficit each year on the current regimen. Now, what basically is happening there, that is money that's already been appropriated by Congress. Now, we have a government shutdown and a default that will have implications on the financial markets, and President Obama laid out the case, not only the American market, but on the international markets, because the U.S. dollar is a reserve currency. Now, the question obviously will be after the default, and the reason we say after the default is that the House has decided they will try the same model that they are working on today. In other words, attaching a delay in Obamacare and various other amendments they have had around the Keystone Pipeline, you name it, for all those together. So thus pushing a default. Now, what a default basically does is raise the borrowing costs for everyone. So that also will have an effect on the economy. Will the economy go into a light recession? We're not talking about a great recession or a depression. Quite possibly. And not only that, you could have a worldwide slowdown because many economies, particularly in the Eurozone, are weak. And it also has an effect on so-called emerging economies. So this is as Vice President Biden would say, a big deal. And I cleaned the language up a bit. It's a big deal in the sense that today, unlike 17 years ago, news travels at a much faster pace. The economic news is now in social media, and it operates 24/7. And also the U.S. economy is much larger, and the integration of the U.S. economy into the world economy is much larger also. 17 years ago, China did not have its place in the economic order of things, nor Brazil. Brazil has now surpassed Japan. So we're looking at a completely different order. And this is an unfortunate situation for the U.S. The U.S. should have a budget mechanism in terms of the debt ceiling that would be automatic, because what you're doing there is you are passing a bill twice. The Congress authorizes by constitutional order. All spending starts in the House and, of course, approved by the Senate and signed by the President. So, in other words, as far as the quote-unquote debt, that has already been appropriated. And once it has been appropriated, it should automatically, the debt ceiling should correspond to it. So the U.S. has very archaic budgetary rules, and they're not suited for the type of economy that the U.S. is in at the present time. Now, over time, these corrections will correct from a macro standpoint, because basically what's happened here, and we see it every day in terms of what various banks, the nation banks are doing, central banks as we call them, the Federal Reserve, their various policies, easier relaxation or accommodation called quantitative easing. You see that in the UK, you see it all over Europe. You also see Pacific bailouts as to the Greek situation, to Spain and to Ireland, and those accommodations are there. So in other words, if we look at the words of the managing director, Lagarde, is Madame Lagarde, that now we are seeing that the central banks are more uniform in their approach to macroeconomic strategies. And we will continue to see this because of the global integration. Now, if a central bank goes in the other direction, it just goes in the other direction, but it won't be in the global economy. And this is the problem that the U.S. is having. The U.S. still has mechanisms that are best suited for the 1940s and 50s and 60s and somewhat to the 70s, but if you recall, there was a great oil embargo there because fossil fuels had become an international affair. Thus, the U.S. was caught. That doesn't happen now because fossil fuels now we have Shell and those kinds of things, SLAY I should say, production there and other methods, reusable energies. That has lessened that problem. But still, the whole fossil fuel production, as we'll see when we do the numbers on Brent crude, etc., is an international affair. So in other words, it's all globalized. And this is the big problem that the U.S. is continually grappling with. And the big question we asked a few minutes in this presentation, will the U.S. remain a reserve currency? The financial houses of the world will not look very favorably upon an unstable regime, and that is what is happening here if there is a default. Of course, the price of borrowing will go up for the U.S. U.S. borrows a lot of money. Thus, investors will be attracted. And also, during the government shutdown, the Treasury will continue to sell bonds. So it'll just be at a higher rate. And that will have its impact on the economy because rates will go up. We see a case in point, the mortgage industry, and rates went up a few points and the industry pretty much shut down. We'll see more and more of this, which means from a policy standpoint, the U.S. will have to react to it. Now, the other solutions you see out there are just a total deregulation as proposed by the candidate Texas Perry, where you have very little regulations in his state of 26 million. But, of course, the standard of living there is subpar. And now we are to the other part. We'll do this on Boston Red. The comments from Albert Gore, the man that won the 2000 presidential race, where he talked about floods all over the world, increasing floods. We have those out west, Colorado, etc. And not only that, but the floodwaters are washing into Nebraska and the rest of the plains. So thus that means additional pollution, additional costs. We'll go now to a report from the Bloomberg News. Actually, we're talking about numbers here. And this is by Ira Katz and Jeannie Shalak. And I'll read it and also post it on our Facebook page and Twitter. A government shutdown in the U.S. would reduce fourth quarter economic growth by as much as 1.4% points, depending on the length. Economists say as the government workers from park rangers to telephone receptionists are furloughed. This is from Dr. Zanti. He's with the Moody Analytic Organization. Estimates a 3 to 4 week shutdown would cut growth by 1.4. And he's now projecting a 2.5% amortized pace of fourth quarter growth without a shutdown. So that basically means you'll be at 1.6, something of that nature. From our standpoint, it could actually be worse than that, depending on the shutdown. First of all, the government has prepared now for a shutdown. Workers have been already furloughed a week under the sequester or austerity. So what this is doing basically is adding more fuel to the basic fire. So you have a worse situation. Also, there's a possibility if you go to the 3 or 4 week shutdown scenario, various transfer payments, i.e. Social Security checks, pensioners' checks, military retirements, etc., even military pay would be delayed. And for the Social Security checks, pension checks, etc., disability checks, they could be delayed for as much as a week or 2 weeks in November. And you can understand what would start to happen there. People would not be able to pay mortgages, rents, medical bills, etc. And in many programs under, say, Medicaid and those kinds of things, people would not be able to get medical care. Providers would not be paid. So that causes a problem. A 2 week shutdown, and more analysis starting October 1 could cut growth by 0.3% to 2.3%. Now that is from our friends at Macroeconomic Advisors in St. Louis. A slowdown would slow the expansion because output loss when workers are furloughed subtract from gross domestic product. The combination The combined prospect of a budget standoff between the White House and Congress hanging over the debt ceiling there even adds more to it. What we have is a political, non-economic storm. That's from Bernard Berhout. He's a chief economist at Economic Outlook Group, so I butchered his name, in Princeton, New Jersey. What everyone is watching right now is the uncertainty is affecting consumer and business psychology. We talked in other broadcasts of psychology of the market. That they are postponing spending until they get a more clarity on what's going to happen in Washington. Well, business and business relations, B2B, in other words, business-to-business dealings, B2C consumer dealings, all revolve around stability. And we don't have stability at this point, and it is beginning to cause all kinds of problems. The consumer is in a holding pattern, still waiting for better employment prospects. That's from Russell Price. He's a senior economist at Ameriprise Financial in Detroit. Data today from the Thomson Reuters people show consumer confidence fell to a 5-month low in September. Stocks fell with the Standard & Poor's 500 index headed for its first weekly dip since August. Concerned the budget impasse will hurt growth. The S&P declined 0.5% to, let's see what we got here, 1,689,000.42. Elsewhere, economic confidence in the Eurozone increased more than forecast in September, adding to signs of a single currency bloc recovery is picking up. An index of executive and consumer sentiment rose for a fifth month at 96.9 from a revised 95.3 in August. That's the European Commission in Brussels. A shutdown wouldn't be unprecedented. We talked about that. 17 funding gaps happened between 1977 and 76. That's from the Congressional Research Service. 95 and 96 interruptions we were talking about lasted from November 14th to November 19th. That was 5 days, effectively 1 week. And the other shutdown was a much longer one from December 16th, so basically a half month to the end of the year and then into the new year, the 6th. So, in other words, let's see, basically here you had, let me see, well, we'll round this up and try to come back to it. Effectively, you had 10 days there and 5, so you had 15 days, basically, the 16th of the month there, 31 days. So, yeah, you effectively had 15, 16 days there. That was when Newt Gingrich was there. Those back-to-back shutdowns that cut GNP by 0.25 percentage points in the fourth quarter of 95, almost entirely because of the furlough. That is from Joel Parkin. He's a senior managing director at Macroeconomic. We'll have more of this now, but this time around it is different. In 1995, the U.S. was not in an aftermath of a depression, a Great Recession, whatever you want to call it. Parkinson, his estimates the impact of GNP this time assume that 36% of federal government's 2.1 million workers would be furloughed. Non-essential employers may include park rangers, most internal revenue types. Zanny, on the other hand, assumes that half of government workers would be furloughed. So a little bit different, a little lower estimate of them, how many would actually be out. But now you also have to understand that a lot of the contract workers would also be furloughed. depending on how their paydays are. Spending by the government workers is unlikely to be affected because they expect to receive back pay. Well, they will receive back pay, but the back pay will take a while to get through the system. A slowdown of a few days would have little impact on the economy, analysts say. On the other hand, closure of more than 2 months would likely, well, we don't need to go 2 months to precipitate a recession. That's from Mark Zanni. And that was in the budget committee there. A 3 or 4 week gap would do significant economic damage. I think what Zanni and some don't take into consideration is because of the speed of how things happen now. Information is put out via outlets like we have here, and thousands more of us, in other words, that are doing broadcasts, podcasts, social media. People get their news in social media. They also get their news from the Yahoos of the world, the Bloombergs, etc. The leaders are banking on winning public support for their goals of looser environmental regulations, Obamacare delay. There'll be no delay in Obamacare. Obamacare will move on. It'll be implemented next week, and whether or not there's a shutdown or not. And the longer it remains in effect, which it will, the term of President Obama, it will have caught on. Now, the debt ceiling. The Secretary Lew says this week the government probably would exhaust extraordinary measures it's been using to keep the around the middle of October. Says we have about $30 billion on hand. That's down from projected $50 billion last month. The U.S. of course was stripped of its AAA rating by Standard & Poor's in 2011, in August 2011. So if it's more stripping, more things could happen. So the shutdown of non-essential services, but one has to remember now, in these so-called non-essential services, they will be shut down. That includes the IRS and others, but at the same time, you also have military pay and other things that are essential services. They will not be shut down, but they would just be working without pay. So they'll have to take out short-term loans or whatever. They'll have to figure out how to do it. So if you miss, this is from parking here, if you miss an interest payment on a national debt, that's a sovereign default of sorts. I think it is shake up the global financial markets. There's no doubt about it shaking up the global financial markets. We'll go ahead now and do the numbers. We'll have to get to Dr. Ellendorf more than likely in a later broadcast. But what we will get to is from the BBC here. BlackBerry, $965 billion loss there. Of course, they're being quite literally bought out. And J.P. Morgan is meeting with tax regulators, an ongoing situation. And these things are things that you did not have in 1995. So he was meeting with the Attorney General, that's Diamond there. J.P. Morgan, they've been warned in recent statements, potential fines. J.P. Morgan has hired 4,000 people, spent $1 billion to beef up its governance operation. That is good for the employment situation. In other words, they didn't really have any governance operation. The bank agreed to pay, $153.6 million in June, $296.9 million in November. That's in 2011. But this is ongoing. Could amount to billions of dollars. It'll run into the billions. A substantial settlement here. So what this shows basically is transparency is not there in the U.S. banking sector. Other fines have been levied with debit cards. There, a lot of those were by arbitration, but still, what you have is in the banks basically a false economy. This goes for the mortgage fiasco where J.C. Morgan cheated the government and cheated consumers. So you have those situations still going on, and the banks with their debit cards artificially making profits by defrauding thousands of consumers. So these types of things you still have in the pipeline. So in other words, the economy is not the 1995 and not the 1996. Granted, they had come through the S&L crisis, but that had been cleaned up, and you were in the tech boom. So that was the reason that the federal workers didn't affect the economy as much at that particular time, because 95, 96, you were in boom days. But this is not the case today, so accelerate that up. We'll do the numbers here. This is from the BBC. The global 30 change was 60.17. That's a 0.88% change, all in the negative. Unless otherwise noted, all these numbers in the negative. The FTSE in London was at 52.93. In let's see, Frankfurt they were at 2.59. In Paris, 0.05 in the positive. In Brussels we returned to the negative 8.87. And 44 in Madrid. In Zurich, 6.36. Red ink all over the place. In Moscow, 13.25. In Johannesburg, in positive territory, 8.43. Return to negative in Bombay, 166.53. Karachi, 483.33. And also all these are Friday unless otherwise noted. 62.19 in Lahore. In Colombo, we return to positive figures, 22.46. And also in Tehran on Wednesday, 445.10 in the green of the positive. In Sydney, they were also positive, 14.10. The Nikkei was down 39.05. The Hang Seng 80.01. In Shanghai, 4.22. In New York, we returned to the negative, 70.06 for the Dow Jones. The Nasdaq, 5.84, all on the shutdown and deficit worries there. And the commodities market, 6.92. In Sao Paulo, 44.05, also in the negative, and negative in Mexico, 423.93. We move now to commodities. There have been some easing in petrol pricing here in the U.S. the last few weeks. Brent crude futures down 74 cents at 108.47, and the spot was down 16 cents. West Texas crude was down only 7 cents at 102.85. In other words, $102.85. T-Boone Pickens is still dancing in the streets. He remembers $20 bale oil, and it's getting close to that magic number. We like to see it under $100 a bale. So that's the futures there. The gold, Dubai gold, down $13.60 at $1,322.07. The uncertainty hasn't affected that. It's down. And we'll look, let's see, corn futures were also down $2.75. Oats down $1.75. Soybean was actually up $3. And soybean oil, which is not very good for the person, it was down 28 cents. Cocoa is up $12. That helps out Ghana and various other countries. Futures, and these are all futures, corn futures were up just 25 cents. And wheat futures were up 25 cents also. Coffee futures were down, $52. And so, if we have any time left here, we'll go to Dr. Ellendorf and his explanation of where the deficit is today and where it will be from his projections in the out years. In fact, the deficit itself has been declining. In the out years, it will go up. But again, these are only projections based upon current law. The problem will be if the shutdown has severe economic effects, then of course there will need to be more stimulus, as the president of the Minneapolis Fed has called for there. So in other words, other things come into play depending on where the economy goes. Or you're just in an anemic economy with demand down. So in other words, if demand is down in the fourth quarter, especially in the retail sector, consumers don't buy. The holiday season is a very big for retail. So retail will be in the tank for the holiday season. And generally speaking, January is a slow month, and February basically fairly slow. Doesn't start picking up until March and April as old man winter, as we say, moves out. This is Numbers Man on the 29th of September 2013. Very little, as they say, cheerful news here to report, but nonetheless, we'll return next week, and at that point in time, we will have some indication to shut down, to not to shut down, where the deficit is going, the debt, whether default will occur or will not occur. Good day.